Is it possible that the explosion of Protestant missionaries and Pentecostal revivals in South America was a CIA psyop to stop Catholic liberation theology? Well, yeah, let's talk about it. Hi, I'm Colton. I'm no stranger to Christian mission work. I went on and led missions trips all over Fiji, the Philippines, El Salvador, and then I worked at Oral Roberts University as a missions coordinator, organizing and coordinating missions trips all over Africa, Asia, and Latin America. And at the time, my intentions were sincere, but what I didn't see was that the whole missions world I stepped into had been shaped by Cold War politics long before I ever got on a plane. So let me give you some context. In the 1960s and 70s, Catholics across Latin America, priests, nuns, and regular people started reading the Bible with the poor and asking basic questions like, why are we living under military dictatorships? Why do so few families own all the land? And why does the United States keep backing the people who exploit us? And what does it mean that Jesus sides with the oppressed? This movement became what we call liberation theology. It didn't stay in seminaries. It spread into these small grassroots Christian-based communities where ordinary people learned how to read, organize, demand wages, demand land reform, and push back against brutal exploitation and authoritarianism. The US was watching this happen and they said absolutely not. They were kind of freaking out about it because when these people were empowering the poor, the way the State Department saw that was as a potential disruption to the economic order that the US was protecting. So how do you stop a religious movement that threatens your economic order that's also protected by the Vatican? Well, they didn't try to crush liberation theology directly. Instead, they tried to drown it out. They backed a massive surge of Protestant missionaries, especially Pentecostal and charismatic ones, because they saw those movements as preaching more about personal salvation, obedience, and spiritual warfare instead of political justice. One of the most blatant examples of this was in Guatemala under Efrain Rios Montt, a Pentecostal dictator who was trained by the US and carried out a genocide while the American evangelical leaders prayed over him, and Reagan called him a man of integrity. Under his civil war, over 200,000 indigenous Mayans were either unalived or disappeared. When you zoom out, it becomes almost impossible to call this accidental. Wherever liberation theology created organized, politically conscious Christian communities, the US State Department and intelligence agencies supported missionary movements that created the opposite. Christians who focused on personal salvation, spiritual warfare, and obedience to authority. Liberation theology tried to teach the poor that their suffering was political. The US responded by promoting a version of Christianity that taught the poor to see their suffering as merely spiritual. One movement threatened an empire, the other stabilized it. I think this should be instructive to Christians in America that as our international despotism turns its head more and more on the American people themselves, to pay attention to what kinds of Christianities are experiencing revivals here today. If you want to know more about this, I have a link in my bio where I've written much more in depth about it and provided a list of sources that you can investigate further.